Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 104 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, my former co-host, John Joseph Adams, will be stopping by to tell us what he's been up to so far in 2014. Also joining us for that conversation will be John's longtime literary agent, Joe Monti. But first up, we've got an interview with acclaimed physicist and futurist Michio Kaku. He often appears on TV shows like Prophets of Science Fiction and Futurescape, and he's the author of best-selling books like Hyperspace, Parallel Worlds, and Physics of the Future. His latest book is called The Future of the Mind. So Michio Kaku, welcome to the show.
Glad to be on.
All right, and so your new book is called The Future of the Mind, and it deals with all these amazing technologies that are in development or will be developed in terms of things we can do with our minds. But for me, one of the most fascinating things about this book was just learning about how weird our minds were to start with, how weird our minds have been this whole time. For example, you talk about in the book how a person can be an atheist in one half of their brain and a religious person in the other half.
Yeah, isn't that amazing that with MRI scans, we can actually see that the left brain and the right brain actually operate slightly differently. The left brain is the dominant brain, so what you consider yourself is basically your left brain. But your right brain could be separated surgically with epileptics. And by cutting the link between the left brain and the right brain, then the right brain can begin to reveal its personality. And we begin to realize that the right brain is actually quite different from the left brain in terms of intentions, in terms of what it wants to be. And we can actually communicate separately with the left brain and the right brain for these epileptics who have this connection surgically cut. And we realize that you could be perhaps Republican on your left brain and Democrat on your right brain. But of course, your arm has only one lever to pull when you're in the voting booth. So you can imagine the conflict this person would have trying to vote with the left brain and the right brain competing over who controls the right arm.
Mm. And you say that maybe one reason we evolved this way is because people often make better decisions when they have multiple points of view offering suggestions, and in effect our brains do that on our behalf.
That's right. Our brain, in some sense, is not like a digital computer, which is what we thought. It's more like a bureaucracy. The leadership of a corporation does not have to know everything that's happening in the bureaucracy. And that's why we have an unconscious mind, as Sigmund Freud correctly pointed out. And that's also why we have emotions. A corporation has to have a quick, rapid response to different kinds of emergencies, independent of the leadership. Emotions are good for our survival. They allow us to react instantly to different kinds of emergencies, and that's why we have emotions.
Mm. And you mentioned that we can see these different parts of the brain come out sometimes with epileptics or if people have brain injuries or things like that. But you also say in the book that there's this technology now called transcranial electromagnetic scanners, which you can actually turn off parts of people's brains at will.
Well, it turns out that this actually has religious implications as well. It turns out that injuries to the left temporal lobe make you hyper-religious. And that is, every time you see somebody fall or a misfortune, you think they're evil spirits and it was meant to be. And we think that many individuals like Joan of Arc throughout history, many prophets, probably suffer from some kind of injury to the left temporal lobe, which induced this behavior. Now, with magnetism, we can actually induce this behavior without having to hit somebody over the head. It's called the God helmet. And by putting on the God helmet, you can actually induce the feeling of being in the presence of spirits, of being in the presence of a higher being. And so nuns were put into the God helmet, and they were asked, doesn't this disprove the existence of God? And these nuns said, no, because this simply is a telephone system to God. God wanted us to have a telephone system by which we can communicate with Him, and that's why God created our brain with this hookup to God. And so I think this does not disprove the existence of God, but it basically shows that physics can create disturbances in the brain to allow us to understand how the brain is wired.
Mhm. And I mean, speaking of hooking things up to the brain, that's sort of the latest thing is being able to have people use their minds to control keyboards or arms, things like that. I guess even Stephen Hawking is using this now.
That's right. My colleague Stephen Hawking has lost control over his fingertips now. He can no longer operate a laptop computer because he has no voice, he has no motion of his fingertips under his control. So the next time you see him on TV, look at his glasses. Look at the right frame of his glasses, and you'll see an EEG sensor, basically picking up radio emissions from his brain. It's not very sophisticated, but with it, he's able to mentally control a laptop by which he can painfully begin to type. In Japan, there's even a toy that you can buy. It's basically a headband with two ears on it, two plastic ears. And when you are excited, when you meet someone at a party, these ears go straight up. And when you lose interest in that person, then the sensors pick that up and the two ears begin to sag. So in other words, in the future, you'll know exactly who you're impressing at a party by looking at the ears, whether they are straight up or whether they sag.
I mean, one thing that really struck me in the book is that you say that, or, it's sort of it's common wisdom among conspiracy people that if you just put if you wear a tinfoil hat, it'll protect your mind from, being spied on by the CIA or something. And you actually say in this book that a telepathy shield would consist of metal foil placed around the brain. So is there any truth to this whole classic tinfoil hat idea?
Well, let's talk about the CIA for a moment. The CIA, we now realize, had a project called MK Ultra, whereby they literally dumped millions of dollars at universities and different military bases to study ESP, to study hypnosis, to study drugs like LSD. Out of this multi-million-dollar project, almost nothing came out. They were not able to control people's minds. They could not read minds at all. However, now we have the sophisticated MRI machines, the magnetic sensors coming in, and they do give a limited ability to peer into your thoughts, but privacy is still protected. You have to have direct access to the person's brain, like in an epileptic operation, or to put a helmet directly on the skull.
But you could shield your brain somehow using a metal foil.
That's right. It's called the Faraday cage. Michael Faraday was the great physicist back in the 1800s who showed that if you are in a metal cage and you are struck with a big electric spark like a lightning bolt, the electricity evenly is distributed around the cage so that you are perfectly fine inside. In the same way, if you really are paranoid about this, putting tinfoil and grounding it is a way to shield the inside from the outside, because any electrical disturbances are distributed around a metal foil.
Mm-hmm. So you think in the future spies and world leaders might have some sort of metal around their brains to keep people from spying on them?
Well, I saw the movie Salt with Angelina Jolie, and in that movie they actually capture a Russian operative and putting him on an MRI machine to read his mind, to use it as a lie detector. Now, it turns out that when you tell the truth, your brain doesn't do much on an MRI scan. But when you tell a lie, first you have to know the truth, and then you have to create the lie, and then you have to create the cover-up, the consistency of the lie with all the other lies you've been telling all these years. That's a lot of brain power. Your brain lights up like a Christmas tree. So in the movie, they actually use an MRI scan to see whether or not this Russian was lying or not. Now, I think this is possible, but again, there are ways you can foil it, because this machine basically looks at tension and nervousness of the brain. And so there are psychopaths who can control a lot of their brain functions and bodily functions, so they don't respond as if they're nervous when they tell a lie.
But do you think that as MRI technology advances, it will be possible to read people's minds, to build a reliable lie detector regardless, that doesn't measure whether the person's nervous or not, but just actually does tell you whether they believe they're telling the truth or not?
Well, at the present time, you can get this commercially. There are commercial outfits who say 90% accuracy, they can tell whether or not a person's lying. But I think we're still in our infancy in terms of being able to do this. However, Let me tell you what we can do with an MRI machine. At Berkeley, where I interviewed the scientists there, they can convert the electrical activity of the brain into 30,000 dots, each dot representing electrical activity of the brain. Then you put these 30,000 dots into a computer. The computer program then digests this information and spits out a picture of what you are thinking about. This actually can be done using today's technology. And in the future, we may be able to actually photograph a dream. Now, this was once considered straight out of science fiction. Look at the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio. But actually, the back of the brain is the visual cortex. And using this MRI scan, you can actually scan the visual cortex and roughly get an approximation of what you are dreaming of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you say that in the future, maybe instead of watching movies, we'll just experience people's thoughts. So you could, say, record what it's like to win an Olympic gold medal and then download that experience into your brain and experience that sensation.
Yeah, this is straight out of the movie The Matrix. Recording a thought and recording emotion was once considered science fiction. But we did it. A scientist just a few months ago recorded the first memory of a mouse, reinserted that memory, and the mouse remembered what it had forgotten. And so now it is actually possible to record a memory. It's been done in the laboratory. Now, the memory is not very complicated. The memory is a mouse sipping through a straw, okay? But the very fact that we could do this at all last year is absolutely amazing, because it means that in the future, we might be able to push the play button and learn calculus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things they do to the mice is they're able to inject them with drugs somehow and make them forget specific things. And you say it might be possible to do that with people as well. I guess there was some pretty promising research on that along those lines.
Yeah, the forgetful pill has been looked at very carefully by the military because, of course, we have all the GIs with traumatic experiences. And it turns out that there are several kinds of drugs that are being tested that seem to have this capability of erasing traumatic memories. And also, however, there is a dark side to this. What happens if someone puts a memory into your brain that is incorrect, that is a false memory? That was explored in the movie Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where Arnold Schwarzenegger thinks he's a good guy because all his memories are the memories of an honest, law-abiding citizen. But in reality, those memories are fake. In reality, he was a cutthroat criminal, okay? And these memories were simply injected into his mind so he could carry out the crime of the century. And so this leaves open the possibility that one day you can tinker with people's memories.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like there's so much potential to this idea, say to be able to treat soldiers with PTSD and relieve them of these unpleasant memories. But you say that you mentioned in the book that these kind of drugs actually got a thumbs down from the President's Council on Bioethics. What did you think about that decision?
Yeah, this is controversial. What the President's Commission on Ethics said is that bad memories are part of our life. We live with bad memories, traumatic memories, and they make us better people. That was the conclusion they made. But I tend to disagree. What happens if a memory is so traumatic that it debilitates you? You're constantly depressed. You can't get a job. You can't function in society because you're haunted by memories of what happened in wartime, right? That's not learning from the past. That's not making you a better person, okay? We're talking about basically an injury to the brain in the form of a memory that's so traumatic it paralyzes you. So I think the President's Commission went too far.
Yeah, I mean, in that section, the bioethicists you quote really seem to me to be committing the naturalistic fallacy of just, this is the natural thing, this is the way it's always been, so it must be for the best.
Yeah, and we've been with diseases. Diseases have been with us for thousands of years, but that doesn't mean we can't cure them. That doesn't mean we have to live with certain kinds of diseases. And I think this whole philosophy that we should be natural, that we should live with disease or live with traumatic memories, I think is taking things too far.
Mm-hmm. There's just one sort of random bit in the book I wanted to ask you about. You say that the court doctor to the Emperor Claudius used electrically charged torpedo fish, which were applied to the head of a patient suffering from severe headaches. Does that work?
Well, you see, it turns out that modern-day technology that is so amazing, it has predecessors in the past that were overlooked or people didn't understand what they were doing. Now, of course, back in the days of the Roman Empire, they did not know that the brain was basically electrical. However, by trial and error, they realized that, yes, there are certain properties of, for example, electric fish and different kinds of living organisms which do harness electricity. And they could be used in some sense to treat things like headaches and stuff like that. And so we realized that the ancients were not quite as stupid as we think they were. They were onto something. But of course, there was no way to exploit it. There was no systematic understanding of electricity. That didn't come for 2,000 more years. And so now we can take the fact that the brain is basically electrical and use magnetic and electric probes to be able to stimulate parts of the brain that can then influence different kinds of behaviors. Now we have something called deep brain stimulation. We can actually put a hair-thin probe into the brain in order to shut off or turn on certain parts of the brain. For example, Parkinson's. Michael J. Fox suffers from Parkinson's disease where you tremble. And with brain scans, you can actually see there's a tiny part of the brain that's overactive. That's why people shake when they have Parkinson's, like in the case of Michael J. Fox. We now know that you can actually insert electrical hair-thin probes into the brain in order to quiet that area of the brain, and these people no longer shake, okay? And also, there's a part of the brain that lights up when you are clinically depressed. Not just ordinary depression, but there's a very, very virulent form of depression that seems to be impervious to drugs, psychotherapy, counseling. It turns out that if you, again, insert this probe into that specific part of the brain, these people who are chronically depressed suddenly become normal. I mean, it's amazing. You see videotapes of these people, chronically depressed for decades, suddenly saying that, hey, this has cured me of depression.
Mm-hmm. You know, in the Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, he imagines a device called the Penfield Mood Organ, which is sort of like a radio, but whatever you tune it to, you can tune it to whatever emotion you want to experience. Do you think this deep brain stimulation has the potential to develop into something like that?
Maybe. It turns out that emotions are pretty much locked into what is called the amygdala, which is located at the very center of the brain. That's a very old part of the brain. It's sometimes called the monkey brain because monkeys also have emotions. And you can stimulate different parts of it, okay? Not only do you have the emotion of fear, okay, which is excited when you dream, for example. When you dream, the amygdala fires, and so that's why many dreams are nightmares and are very fearsome. However, there's another part in the hypothalamus, which is the pleasure center. And so then the question becomes ethical. Is it ethical to stimulate the pleasure center and experience pure emotion, the emotion of joy and ecstasy? It turns out if you take a mouse, you can also put a probe right to the pleasure center, which is called the nucleus accumbens, of the mouse, hook that mouse to a telegraph key, so that by pushing the telegraph key, it self-stimulates the pleasure center. These mice will then hit this telegraph key twice a second until they die of starvation. Then you go up the evolutionary scale. You put rabbits, dogs, cats, whatever, and see whether they're smart enough to realize that this is lethal. This is killing them. They have to stop and go out and eat, or else they were starved to death. So a porpoise was put on this device. You can locate the pleasure center of the porpoise brain, hook it up to a sensor, and the porpoise, by going forward, backward, can stimulate the sensor. What happened was these porpoise would stimulate the pleasure center continually until it realized it was dying. It will starve to death. So it stopped, went out and grabbed some fish, and then went back and stimulated itself. Now, this has also been done on humans. Humans, of course, are smart enough to realize that this is death, that they will eventually die unless they go out and eat. So humans are also hooked up to this, but we have to realize that a certain fraction of the human race would prefer to live in a drug-induced euphoria. And so if this were to become widespread, we might find a certain fraction of the human race permanently hooked up to this, constantly stimulating themselves.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is this idea of intelligence boosting, like we see in the novel Flowers for Algernon. How plausible is that looking?
Well, it turns out that there are several recorded cases of people with brain injury to the left side of the brain, the left temporal side of the brain. One person had a bullet that went through that side of the brain when he was a child. Another person dived into a swimming pool, hit that left side of the brain very hard at the bottom of the swimming pool. And these people came out to be mathematical geniuses. These are called savants. They have an incredible ability to do calculations. They can tell you 1,000 years into the future if a certain day is going to be Wednesday or Thursday. Some of them have artistic memories. They can have a flight over Manhattan. And one helicopter flight, they memorized the entire landscape of New York Harbor, and they could paint the entire harbor after this. In fact, when you go to JFK Airport and you land at the International Terminal, look up, and you will see the mural painted by one of these savants after one helicopter ride over New York City Harbor. Now, autistic savants also exist. And we think that autism is not inherently linked to becoming what is called a savant. We think that autism probably damages the left temporal lobe in a way, just like with a bullet, just like with hitting your head on the swimming pool, which induces this kind of savant behavior. Now, we brain scan these individuals. They're MRI scans. We see that their brains are not quite normal. They are slightly deformed. Especially in the case of autistics, we see damage to the brain. But we also see that these people have memories that would put them in the genius level, mathematical abilities that are absolutely astounding. Now, there's a mild form of autism called Asperger's. These people can function in society. We think, in fact, that a certain fraction of the people in Silicon Valley are actually Asperger's. We think that Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist who ever lived, was a sufferer from Asperger's. His personality comes right out of a book of Asperger's. Isaac Newton, by the way, was elected to the British Parliament, and there's only one instance where he actually said something as a member of the Parliament, when he asked for the window to be closed because it was too drafty. That is the only known time that Isaac Newton spoke in the British Parliament. Anyway, Asperger's can be studied, but we are not yet at the ability to brain scan these people and duplicate this. We simply don't know. There's several theories I mentioned in my book as to why damage to the left temporal lobe leads to this kind of behavior. But at the present time, it's still a mystery.
I mean, can you explain why, if these abilities are sort of within the capacity of typical brains and they can be brought out by something as simple as a brain injury, why that trait didn't, by natural selection, become more common in the population?
Right. There must be some reason why this ability, which is inherent in all of us, by the way, is not manifest. And we think the reason is clear. Some of these people that scientists have examined in the past that have these fantastic powers are also deficient in their personality. Some of them have very low IQ. Some of them could barely tie their shoelace. And they cannot function in society. They're haunted by all these memories continually coming at them. One woman who has this fantastic photographic memory, there's like split vision. One vision is what she sees in front of her, and the other vision is the videotape of what happened 35 years ago on a Monday, constantly rolling in front of her. And so it's not functional. So I think what evolution has done is made us forget. In other words, the brain probably records everything. It's a runaway tape recorder. But there's a certain algorithm of forgetfulness. In these individuals, apparently that algorithm of forgetfulness is turned off, and they simply do not erase extraneous memories. These people have forgotten how to forget.
And I mean, you really make the point in the book that we think of people with superintelligence as just ruling the world. but that actually people with very, that the world is sort of ruled sadly by people with kind of average to low intelligence, and that people with very high intelligence often go into science or journalism, art, academia, which are not the most lucrative professions, or power amassing professions.
In so many comic books and movies, we have the super genius becoming the villain like Lex Luthor, or all the movies where you see super brains take over the world. But we actually do have super brains. They actually do exist. Some of them are my friends. They're Nobel Prize winners in theoretical physics. And their incomes are very low, a fraction of what Zuckerberg makes, a founder of Facebook. And so having a super brain does not make you suddenly become a dictator of the world, okay? So we don't have to fear the scenarios of science fiction where the Lex Luthors of the world take over. Because people with exceptional ability, they don't become politicians. They don't become multimillionaires. And some of them did become professors like me, making a measly income.
So in addition to boosting human intelligence, in the book you also talk about boosting animal intelligence, like the recent movie Rise of the Planet of the Apes, where an Alzheimer's treatment ends up creating this super brilliant ape.
Yeah, believe it or not, scientists are seriously looking at the Planet of the Apes type scenario. First of all, we are 98.5 genetically equivalent to a chimpanzee. Believe it or not, only a handful of genes separates us from the chimpanzee. Yet, we live twice as long as a chimpanzee. We have a vocabulary many, many times that of a chimpanzee. And we have the ability to see the future, to run simulations of the future. Chimpanzees have no concept of tomorrow. Tomorrow for them doesn't really exist as a definite kind of thing. So a handful of genes made the difference. Now, the question is, how many of these genes are there? There are perhaps one or maybe 100 of them. And is it possible to manipulate them with gene therapy? And the answer is possibly yes. My point of view is, if you were to take a chimpanzee and slowly mutate it so it has bigger cranial capacity, better articulation of the voice box so it can say things, better manipulation of the index finger so it can pick up tools, what you wind up with is something that looks like a human. And so why bother, right? Because the manipulation of the genes of an ape, yes, it's definitely possible. We know what these genes are now. We've located them. We've cataloged them. I mentioned them in my book, in fact. So it may be possible to do something like Planet of the Apes, but what you will wind up with is something that looks like a human.
I mean, when you're talking about this idea of maybe making animals more intelligent, you say that that not surprisingly, this area of bioethics is so new that it is totally unexplored. And it seems to me that science fiction has been presenting this idea of uplifting animals, going back to the Island of Dr. Moreau and earlier. And do you think that bioethicists should be reading more science fiction so that they're grappling with the ethical implications of these ideas before they happen rather than once they're upon us?
Oh, I think so, definitely, because I think science fiction is way past bioethicists who are simply responding to what's happening in the laboratory today, not responding to what will happen in the laboratory a few decades from now.
Mm-hmm. It's a very sort of contentious issue in science fiction and futurism. Will it be possible for people to upload their minds to computers or transfer their brains to robots, things like that? Where do you come down in that debate?
Okay, well, President Barack Obama initiated a bombshell last January in the State of the Union address when he said that hundreds of millions of dollars will be allocated to what is called the BRAIN Project. The European Union has already allocated $1 billion toward the BRAIN Project. This is the next big thing in science. If I have this Connectome project, this BRAIN project, which delineates all the pathways of the brain, then we could, on a CD-ROM, create Brain 2.0. That is a Xerox copy of the brain with all the memories, all the personalities intact. In which case, if you die, your wetware dies. But the software that codes all the memories and personality quirks survives after you die. So in some sense, you become immortal. And if you become immortal, you also have mind outside body. And this is a theme explored in many science fiction novels, even in Star Trek, where Captain Kirk encounters beings that are pure consciousness. They exist in globes, glowing globes of light, but they are consciousness without a body. And then, of course, these conscious beings want to take over the body of Spock, and that's the plot line of that episode. But is that possible? And the answer is yes. If the Connectome and Brain Project come to fruition after throwing $1 billion at it, we may have a backup copy of the brain that survives even after you die. And then in the book, I mentioned perhaps one of the greatest science fiction short stories written by Isaac Asimov. His favorite science fiction story was way in the future when pure consciousness zips across the universe. And this is a possibility. If I have a CD-ROM with all the neural connections on a disk, I can put that on a laser beam. And I can shoot that in outer space at the speed of light. And then I can explore the universe at the speed of light. Forget the booster rockets. Forget asteroid collisions. Forget weightlessness. Forget radiation dangers. All of that is bunk when I put intelligence on a laser beam and shoot the laser beam to the stars. And then at the other end, there's a relay station which absorbs the laser beam and puts all this memory into a robot. And so you can then begin to feel and live on another star system. So this idea was inspired by Isaac Asimov and other science fiction writers, but now we think it could be possible.
Mm-hmm. You know, the author Neil Gaiman recently wrote that he had visited China and that they had told him there that they thought that the Chinese scientists were very good at iterating on existing technologies, but weren't as good at coming up with completely new ideas on their own. And they had looked at American scientists and saw that they read a lot of science fiction, and they were trying to encourage their students to read more science fiction to develop more of that kind of creative outlook. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I have definite thoughts on this. In Asia, we have the expression, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. That is the Asian philosophy of life. You stick out, you're going to get cream. However, in the West, we have the exact opposite expression, and that is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that, in a nutshell, typifies one of the major defects of the Asian educational system. If you are a budding Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, you are hammered down. And when I see the top physicists of China, there's a program called Cuspia, which selects the top university students in physics and sends them to the United States to learn physics. I know this because I'm on the Cuspia committee. One of my students, in fact, was a Cuspia student. And I can see these Chinese physicists close up. And I realize that they're very good at taking orders. You tell them to do something, they're not going to badmouth you. They're not going to snicker. They're not going to say, ho, why do I have to do that? No, they do it, and they do it very well. But when you ask them to come up with a new idea, that's where they get paralyzed. And of course, that's what Silicon Valley is all about. We have tons of squeaky wheels in Silicon Valley, all asking for the grease, all asking for startup funds to make their dreams come true. And so I think that the Asian system has to learn this, and science fiction has a definite role to play. Some of the greatest scientists of all time were inspired by science fiction. Take a look at Edwin Hubble, the greatest astronomer of the 20th century, who discovered the expanding universe. When he was a kid, his father wanted him to be a country lawyer. So he learned law, went to Oxford, and was destined to become a country lawyer. But he remembered reading Jules Verne as a child, and he was fascinated by the stars. So he gave up his law career, went to Chicago, got a PhD in astronomy, and went on to discover the expanding universe, and eventually what is called the Big Bang Theory. And so I think science fiction had a very definite role to play in his upbringing. Also, Carl Sagan, the noted astronomer. When he was young, he wrote that he used to read John Carter of Mars. And he dreamt about chasing Dejasaurus on the sands of Mars, just like what John Carter did in that series. And he became an astronomer and was fascinated by Mars as a consequence. So yeah, I think science fiction definitely expands your imagination and allows you to dream about worlds that don't exist, but could exist in the future.
Mm-hmm. See, then we had a listener, Zach Chapman, wanted me to ask you. He says a few years ago, Michio Kaku was on a show, The Science of Games. Does he play any video games? If so, which ones are his favorites?
Well, I don't have enough time to play video games now, but I used to play a lot of video games. And the ones that I like the best are the ones that really challenge you and play with space and time. For example, we think space and time is flat. We had this mental picture of rocket ships shooting things at other rocket ships. That is a very common sense point of view that even animals understand. But we physicists work in curved space. We work in space with holes in it, called wormholes. We work in spaces where things can disappear, reappear. If you go off the right-hand side of the video screen, you wind up on the left-hand side of the video screen. So space is curved. And so these are the games that I think are the most challenging because they force you to question your common sense notion of what is space and what is time.
Another listener, Joe Monti, says, ask about the dark matter research going on in a lab under a mountain in Italy. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yes. We think that most of the matter in the universe is actually dark matter. So all the high school textbooks are actually wrong. All the high school textbooks say that the world is mainly made out of atoms. End of story. That's what the world is made of, atoms. We now know that's wrong. Only 4% of the universe is made out of atoms. 23% actually is made out of dark matter, an invisible matter that surrounds the Milky Way galaxy. And 73% of the universe is dark energy, which is blowing the universe apart. It's the energy of the Big Bang itself. People ask the question, what's propelling the galaxies apart? And it's dark energy. And we are clueless as to understanding what is dark matter and dark energy. However, in Rome, in different laboratories around the world, we have gigantic detectors hoping to pick up the collision of a proton with dark matter. It should create a tiny spark that should be visible, and that's why many laboratories around the world are looking for that spark, indicating that matter has collided with dark matter. So if anyone in your audience understands what dark matter is, have them call me first.
All right, yeah, you can contact us at geeksgalaxy@gmail.com and let us know what dark matter really is. I guess unfortunately we're almost all out of time here. Do you want to just tell us what other projects? Do you have any new books or TV shows or anything that you'd like people to know about?
Well, again, the book is called The Future of the Mind, which is coming out very soon in the end of February. I'm on a 12-city book tour, in fact. And I just finished a series for the Science Channel called Futurescape, a 6-part series with the actor James Wood, talking about what the future is going to look like, the future of robots, the future of brain science, and things like that. What I do professionally, of course, is try to complete Einstein's dream of a theory of everything. What I'm looking for professionally is an equation perhaps no more than 1 inch long that will summarize all physical phenomena into a single theory, and that is the theory of everything.
All right, great. So, Michio Kaku, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Michio Kaku for joining us on the show. And as we mentioned, for our panel today, longtime Geek's Guide to the Galaxy co-host John Joseph Adams will be stopping by to let us know what he's been up to so far in 2014. So John, welcome back.
Thanks.
And also joining us today will be John's longtime literary agent, Joe Monti. He's also now editing the new Saga fantasy and science fiction imprint at Simon & Schuster. So Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and so Joe, first of all, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how did you get into publishing?
Oh, I started as a bookseller, and I was a bookseller for 7 years, and then I became a buyer for Barnes & Noble. I was a buyer for children's fiction for 11 years, and I was in the right place at the right time. I started in 96, right through 2006, and that's when everything changed. Everything started changing in 97, 98. And so I was there for the creation of chapter books and the explosion of YA and middle grade with Harry Potter. And I've always loved fantasy and science fiction, and so when Harry Potter broke things out, I got to utilize my knowledge and love of the field and incorporate it into children's. And then I left Barnes & Noble and went into publishing. I worked in sales, and then I went into editorial. And then from editorial, I went to be the literary agent for a few years. And now I'm back running my own fantasy and science fiction horror imprint, Simon & Schuster.
Yeah, and we definitely want to talk more about your imprint. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I think probably a lot of people don't really, if they don't follow publishing that closely, they just have a vague idea of what a literary agent does. So could you just explain for people just what does a literary agent basically do?
We help get your project to the right place. I mean, on one hand, you're a gatekeeper, right? You're going through slush, you're getting through submissions that prospective authors are sending to you, and you have your criteria of what you're looking for vaguely. And you find a couple of projects that you love, and then you start championing them. And for me personally, I would always work with the author to try to make their work the best possible iteration of what they were trying to get out. So we go through a couple of edits, get it shaped up, a test that is never done, and then get it ready for submission, and then send it out based on what I know of the field and what certain editors like or are looking for right now, and a combination of that. Send it out to select editors to see if they'd be interested in being the publisher of this project. And then there's the negotiations of the terms of the deal. And the other aspect that's really important is thinking about the long-term view of someone's career, like what makes sense now, and then 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And always trying to plan ahead, even if that may change as you're going along.
I mean, John, why don't you tell us how you ended up with Joe as your agent?
Well, I actually met Joe in New York. There was a monthly lunch series that I used to go to that had some editors and authors and a few agents. Joe he was part of the group that would come occasionally, and he was a book buyer at the time, and so I got to know him through that. And then a couple years later, my other literary agent, my first literary agent, decided to retire. So I was looking for a new agent, and so Joe just emailed me, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to talk?" And I was like, I wasn't sure because I knew that his background was in, children's fiction. He was the children's book buyer, and I knew that incorporated YA as well. But and of course, I knew Joe knew science fiction and fantasy very well, but I wasn't sure that that he knew adult science fiction and fantasy publishing well enough to do that, or if he was going to even be handling that typically. But then, so, we met, and we just had a really great conversation, and we saw eye to eye, like, on everything. And he was like, "Oh no, I'm totally, going to be repping a lot of adult." And so, we just really seemed like a good fit. I already knew that I liked him. I already knew that I'd be able to work with him well, just because, having spent so much time chatting with him and stuff. So, that's how he ended up as my agent.
Yeah, I think the thing that really worked for the two of us, and why I wanted to work with you, because we both think the same way of I should think of a better word than exploiting the zeitgeist, but we like to look at, like, okay, what's trending? And being a buyer, I still think like a buyer even now as an editor. Okay, what's working in the marketplace, and what's sub-trending, and what do you think is going to work in a year or two from now, and when the book actually comes out. And all of that kind of goes into the disc gulp and in your head. And then, like, but John and I both thought the same way. And over that breakfast, was it breakfast or lunch? Now I can't remember, actually. I
think it was lunch.
It was lunch, that's right.
At the Skylark Diner.
At the Skylark Diner, exactly. And we both like, you know what you should do? You should do this. Like, that's totally what I want to do. And so it was good.
Yeah, actually, one funny thing about that conversation is, like, so this was right around the time when the John Carter of Mars movie was sort of just announced, and it was forthcoming, and I had the idea to do this anthology of John Carter stories, and which eventually came out called Under the Moons of Mars. And so at the time, when I had my original literary agent, I had pitched to her that idea, and so I ran it all by her, and she's like, "Barsoom? What's that?" And so obviously she wasn't really on board with the idea, and I was like, "Well, it doesn't matter that you don't know what it is. By the time the movie comes out, everyone will know what it is, And so then when I had the meeting with Joe, he actually had the same idea, and he pitched it to me, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I had that same idea." And so it was like, that was one of the things where I was like, "Okay, I think we're on the same wavelength here."
All right, cool. And so I really want to talk about the big news that was just announced this past week. Actually, John, why don't you tell us what the big news is?
So many of you are probably familiar with the Best American series published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Best American short stories, and then they do Best American all kinds of things. Best American mystery, Best American essays, Best American sports writing. They even have Best American infographics, which is kind of strange. But now I'm going to be the series editor for Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. So that's obviously super exciting. I get to have a really big impact on exposing the greater world at large, not just the genre community, but all readers to science fiction and fantasy, and show them what it's capable of. As I said in my proposal, it's like, this is the genre of like Flowers for Algernon and The Death Bird and other classics like that. Like, that's like the best examples of genre fiction, like, stand on the same ground as the greatest works of any other genres. And I at least in my opinion, they're actually better, but they're at least as good as the greatest works in other genres. And so, one of my goals with this series will be to try to show people that, it's really exciting.
And it was Joe's idea, right?
It was Joe's idea. Yeah.
Well, the sales job I took after I left Barnes & Noble was working at Houghton. I'm sorry to do this on the air there, John. Houghton. This is one of the first week's lessons I got. Houghton Mifflin. And so I knew the guys who were in charge of running the Best American series, and actually I was there at the inception creation of the Best American Non-Required Reading series, which Dave Edgar's edits. And so, even at the time, I thought, like, you should do this. And they're like, no, I don't know. And then last year we tried that, and they weren't ready for it. And this year they were. And I think it's fantastic. I think that the genre of fantasy and science fiction is still marginalized when it absolutely is not. 9 of the 10 biggest grossing films last year were fantasy or science fiction movies. Fast and Furious 6 was the outlier. You can consider that a fantasy movie if you like. And
the physics were certainly fantasy.
Right, exactly. And other things. And so we've already adopted it, I think, as mainstream in many ways. And so I think there's this veneer that gets held on to that, it's not a mainstream thing. And it absolutely is. So I think this is a great thing.
Yeah, and if people don't know, this is as I understand it, the most prestigious short story anthology series. It's the one that, when I was an undergraduate, that were assigned in all my creative writing classes and things like that. Do you think that having this Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy will increase the stature of those genres within colleges?
Yeah, I think so. I had the same experience when I was in college. I had at least one of my classes. It was a creative writing class. We had the current year's Best American Short Stories as one of the texts. And so I think certainly any college that has a science fiction lit course will probably want to consider that. And then, of course, I think it's possible that any other sort of literature classes that try to expose the students to more than just the traditional required reading sort of stuff, maybe we'll be able to incorporate that. But like you say, it's the most prestigious series. So it's such a huge honor to actually be part of it. But I think definitely just by being sort of canonized as part of the series, that alone is going to do a lot. And I think a lot of people who would typically not pick up an anthology of science fiction and fantasy stories, they might try it just because of that Best American name.
It's a war of attrition. It's like all things that are marginalized. Eventually, it starts creeping in, and we've got generations. If you look loosely at as something that's like the Harry Potter generation, these kids who grew up at the same time as the books, if you will, they're in their mid-20s now. So they're out of college, maybe in grad school, they're starting their careers. In 10 years, they're going to be in positions of power in the next 10 to 15 years. And this is who we're selling these books to, not just them and the older generations and younger generations to come. And I think that's exciting. And the way these books are displayed, that they're all together and they're not thought of and separated out. I think all of that combined is going to be something positive.
And so where are the stories going to come from, John? Are they going to come primarily from fantasy and science fiction magazines, or like what will be the range of authors and magazines that you'll be drawing from?
Well, I'm going to try to read everything that I can. Obviously, the name of the series is Best American, so it's actually American is one of the criteria, although that actually also incorporates Canada, so I guess it's kind of technically North American. Although no mention of Mexico was in there. So if I find an original story by an author who lives in Mexico, I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But, as far as where, obviously all the traditional science fiction and fantasy publications, that includes all of the online publications and ebook only and that kind of thing, as well as the traditional print magazines. I'll also be reading all the original anthologies in the field, and I'll be trying to track down all of the genre stories that crop up in mainstream magazines, like the New Yorker occasionally publishes some, and Tin House, and all these sorts of sort of top tier literary magazines. A lot of them published a genre story occasionally. People like Karen Russell, who we had on the show, they write genre stories a lot, and they end up in these mainstream publications. So I'm going to be wanting to track all those down and make sure I consider all those as well.
And maybe people are getting a sense of why John is a little too busy to be a full-time co-host of the show this year.
Yeah, it's super intimidating, actually, to have that on my plate and know, not only reading it all, but actually just tracking it all down and trying to make sure that I don't miss anything. I'm doing all I can. I set up a mini site on my website, and so if you go to johnjosephadams.com/best-American, you can read more about the series, but I'm also soliciting recommendations from readers. So if readers find something they really like, they can recommend it to me. I'm just using a Google form for that. So it's just, you fill out a little form and then submit it, and then I get it into a database. Also I just have it opened up to writers as well. So if writers publish something elsewhere, not elsewhere, but they don't sell it to me. They just publish it in the field somewhere or outside the field. And if they want to submit it to me, they want to make sure I see it. I just have I have a submission portal open for it, so anybody can send it to me.
Do you have a sense, John, of how, is this a series, are they putting out this one book and they're going to see how it does, or are they committing to multiple volumes at this point?
Well, they committed to doing 2 volumes, and then after those 2 come out, then they'll reevaluate and decide whether or not to continue it. I hope obviously they'll continue it into the future. And it's going to be decided based on mostly on sales figures, I imagine. And how well they're received will also play a part, probably as well. I think we have a really good chance of doing well, given that we have Joe Hill as our first guest editor, and we'll see who else we can line up for volume 2. Hopefully we can get somebody, with that sort of name recognition again, and also who, would you sort of have this sense that they would pick really interesting things. That was something I thought about with Joe, is that I would be really curious to see what he'll pick. But then also he has this huge fan base, and, and he's also he's more sort of on the horror side and more sort of mainstream thriller side than maybe, most, genre writers. And so, I'm hoping, he'll draw some of those fans over to give the series a try, and, that'll help the series do better and thus, help it continue into the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, so then, John, your other big project recently was your Women Destroy SF Kickstarter that raised over $50,000. Why don't you just tell people a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So it all kind of started with with some criticism online, or I guess I should put criticism in quotes, but I mean, it was like somebody posted this review, and it was like, it was really stupid and, very dismissive of women. And basically, more or less, the review was saying like, oh, I'm so sick of these women destroying science fiction with their girl cooties, and which is obviously a ridiculous attitude to have, especially in this day and age. But I mean, So a lot of people online had seen that and were upset about it. And so on Twitter, my wife actually joked, after reading that, she was like, "Hey, ladies, I'm ready to destroy science fiction today. Who's with me?" And, a bunch of people chimed in and they were all excited about it and they liked the idea. And so I said, what if we did a special issue of Lightspeed called Women Destroy Science Fiction? And we just embrace that idea and just like turn it all over entirely to the women, women of Lightspeed. I already have a lot of staff that are women, and we'll get a guest editor, and so we decided to do that. And so we just announced it, and we just threw together a quick announcement, and we just had an email address on the website that said, "I want to destroy SF at lightspeedmagazine.com." Like, and instructions, if you want more information, you should email that. And so we announced that with basically no information, just the idea that we're going to do this special issue. And within like a day, we were just like flooded. We were inundated with emails, like 200 people just like clamoring to help or to be involved in some way. And so we realized, like, this is like there's a real hunger for this thing. And so we thought, well, what can we do to make sure that we incorporate as many of these voices as possible that want to participate? And so we decided to try to make the issue a double issue. Instead of just doing a regular issue of Lightspeed, we tried to make it a double issue. And so to do that, we decided to launch the Kickstarter. We crunched some numbers and we figured, okay, well, if we raise $5,000, we should be able to make it into a double issue easily enough. And that'll cover all of our costs and allow us to, pay the contributors well and everything like that. And so we did that. And then, it just really took off. I mean, I guess we shouldn't be too surprised given how excited people were about it when we first announced it. But once we launched the Kickstarter, we were only asking for 5,000. And like you said, we ended up with over 53,000.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are you going to do with what are you going to do with all that money? I mean, where's all that money? Where's that $50,000 going? You're not going to add an addition to your house or anything, right?
Right. Well, no. It's funny. The funds you raise in a Kickstarter actually probably disappear a lot faster than you might think, especially on a big project like this. I mean, a lot of it's going to go toward the Women Destroy Science Fiction issue, obviously, which ended up costing a lot more than we initially thought, just because they sort of kept growing as we went along. But also we had a couple of big stretch goals. So once we hit 25K, we announced that we were going to do Women Destroy Horror as a special issue of Nightmare, and that'll be guest edited by Ellen Datlow. And then when we hit 35K, we announced we do Women Destroy Fantasy. And then that one will be a special issue of Fantasy Magazine, guest edited by Kat Rambo. But so both of those will come out in October. And then the Women Destroy Science Fiction one, the original one, that will come out in June as our anniversary issue. So, I mean, that's where most of the money is going, and as well as, just otherwise going back into the magazine. And I mean, the whole idea was to make the magazine better, with any of the additional proceeds. Although I have to say, as nice as the 53,000, number was, the number I think I'm most excited about is 300, which is the number of new subscribers we got, out of the Kickstarter. And a good portion of those were 1-year subscriptions. So I'm just really hoping to make fans out of all of those people and hopefully to make fans out of the, 1,700, whatever, people who bought just the individual issue of the magazine. We ended up with 2,800, backers, total. So that's all really exciting. Just the idea that we may have been exposing the magazine to all those new readers.
Mm-hmm. See, Joe, do you want to jump in here? Were you following this Kickstarter?
Oh, absolutely.
What's your take on it?
I'm so proud of John and Christy and everyone. There's one of these, sayings I know that go around the field that women don't sell as well in fantasy and science fiction, or it's such garbage. And yet these things self-perpetuate themselves, and so I love the fact that you're doing this, and the fact that it's such a bold statement, the snarkiness of it, but it still works. And for Saga Press, so far as of date, we've acquired 9 books, and 5 of them are by women. So I believe in this, and I don't believe that the idea that cooties exists in some way or another. If anything, I think this is an underserved readership, and it's something that smart publishers would be publishing more towards. So I think it's smart on so many different levels.
I mean, so John, you see this as a bold statement. Did you get any pushback on this? I mean, from like the guy who wrote that original review or anything? Did anyone Was there any pushback?
Surprisingly not. And I should say, actually, I mentioned my wife, Christy Yant. She's the one that sort of made the tweet that started it all. And she's the one that became the guest editor because she's been Lightspeed's assistant editor since the beginning of the magazine, basically. I just felt like I have to throw that out there. I mentioned the other guest editors and I somehow omitted her. But yeah, no, I mean, and Christy was actually really worried about that when we first announced it. And, cause we've seen a lot of these, flame wars online and she doesn't like getting involved in any of that stuff with good reason. But she was very concerned about it, and I was like, I don't know, I'm like a little worried about it, but I wasn't too much so, just because I feel like Lightspeed has been, we've had gender parity in the magazine since the beginning. And that's partially because we publish half reprints, half originals. So whenever I was sort of a little bit weighted, too much towards, original stories by men, I would try to help course correct by publishing more reprints by women. And in doing that, I was hoping to encourage women to submit to the magazine and feel like it's a home that they can publish in. Because I think a lot of what happens in magazines is that women see these predominantly male tables of contents and then they feel like, well, I'm not welcome there. And so, so there was that, but then, and so of course we were a little worried about some blowback there. And, surprisingly enough, I mean, there was almost none. Like when we first announced it, there was like one dude who said something about it, and it was like, okay, well, he's a dude, and so it's not really super relevant that he's complaining about it. But and there was one woman who complained about it a little bit, but then I think she changed her mind after reading more about it because then she wanted to be involved later. And so really, those were like the only people that I saw say anything negative about it, which is kind of amazing.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you're doing some future things along these lines, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, So on the last day of the Kickstarter, we announced what we're going to do in the future. So next year, we're going to do Queers Destroy Science Fiction. So we're going to do that special issue of Lightspeed. And then we're going to do another Kickstarter next year. And then to make it a double issue. And then if that succeeds as well, we'll also have the same stretch goals in place. So, if we fund a similar amount, we might end up with, Queers Destroy Horror and Queers Destroy Fantasy as well. So that's what's on tap for next year. And then we have some ideas for what to do in the future beyond that as well. So, we're going to keep doing it as long as people keep being idiots about this kind of stuff, I'd love it if we didn't have to. Like if everyone suddenly became reasonable about human rights and respect for people, we wouldn't have to do this kind of special issue. But until that day comes, I guess we'll keep trying to think of ways to do it. I mean, honestly, I can't imagine that we could do it for more than maybe 4 or 5 years. And at that point, we'd be really struggling to think of what to do, what would make actual sense to do as a theme. But I mean, we have a couple other ideas. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Joe, I mean, I guess you're interested in diversity as well. I saw that you edited this Diverse Energies anthology. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, with Toby Buckell. This was right around the Race Fail 2 and the whitewashing of YA fiascos that were happening a few years ago. And
do you want to maybe just explain what those are?
I'm going to be a little cloudy on exact details, but of YA, there was a couple of covers, particularly Justine Larbalastier's Liar, which got a different person. It was about a person of color, perhaps, and the cover itself changed, and it was a Caucasian person. Another person had their cover changed, and it was set in a kind of ersatz China, and they had a Caucasian girl on the cover for the paperback. And these things were happening and coming up, and started a discussion at the same time that Race Fail was happening on the internet. And somebody else was commenting on, I won't call him out, but one particular reviewer for a magazine had something to talk about the third world fantasy and science fiction, and just the jargon in there was just his use of words was just really outdated, and beyond that, it was kind of belying other things. And so instead of getting pissed off and being like poster number 113 on a blog, like, yeah, this stinks, or I decided to do something positive, because that largely online, that was lacking. And that was frustrating as well. That, yeah, we're all rallying behind each other. We aren't doing anything constructive. And that's what I like so much about what John and Christie are doing, is it is something constructive. And so I want to do something constructive too. And so, I called up Tobias Buckell, who was a client at the time, and a friend. I'm like, we can just do this right now. I'm on the train home coming in from the city, and like, we can just do this right now. We were on the phone. We made up a list of people we wanted to invite, and we got them on board, and then we put together this anthology. We knew we wanted to sell it to Two, which is a small publisher that has its own imprint for fantasy and science fiction YA for people of color, and we sold to them, and I donated all of the proceeds, my end, to the Carl Brandon Society, and again, it was something positive, and it was something I thought that started a dialogue with a lot of people and with a lot of readers, because they weren't used to that kind of thing in YA, especially an anthology of short stories. It's kind of rare.
And was that the first book you'd ever edited?
Yeah, actually. So that was fun too.
So had you like, having worked as John's agent for so long, had you picked up some tips from from watching him?
I asked. Yeah, John helped me a lot. Actually, like, is this what you do? Is this what you do? Is this how you do that? And I cribbed from John a lot. Yeah, but I didn't feel bad about it because it wasn't competition. And everything from on my end was going to charity. So.
Did that experience of editing an anthology play any role in you deciding to move over to the editing side with Saga?
No. This is my dream job. Actually, I always wanted to do this. And I'm so very happy that I have the opportunity, because it's very rare, especially when you take a look at the kind of career I've had, which is varied. And it's not the natural progression of an editor. So I like to think and hope that my varied experiences are going to add a lot of value, but it's a rare thing, and so I'm extremely excited.
I mean, I think of Simon & Schuster as being a very sort of large, respectable literary publishing house. Do you see Saga in some way sort of parallel to John's doing Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, as sort of bringing this genre element more into the mainstream?
Well, it's something I want to do, bring more into the mainstream. I think the past couple of years, we've seen the success of imprints like William Morrow and Crown. And I'm sorry, I forget what imprint Lev Grossman's books were coming out of at Penguin. But, and you see these books that are coming from places that are not fantasy science fiction homes. And I think there's a value in there, but I think there's also a statement, and that statement is that this can be mainstream. I think eventually, what you would, I think, referring to, John, is like, how long can I keep this going with destroy this, destroy that? Is that you end up ghettoizing yourself to some degree, and just to lay down something of a theory. I think in some ways, not all, the fantasy and science fiction industry publishing industry at least, has ghettoized itself and like limited what its potential can be.
And I mean, how do you intend to? I mean,
I think a lot of it's packaging, honestly, David. I think you think, well, okay, this is kind of package that will speak to the fan base, and that'll speak to the fan base. And then what about the rest of the potential readership? Or even thinking that there's a potential readership beyond your car marketing. And you take a look at a book like Wind Up Girl. Initially, it has this cover, which is interesting. It's got a giant mastodon on the cover going through Southeast Asia. And, it's a weird juxtaposition. Like, okay, that could be attractive to some readers. But once products start getting all the awards and the attention and the Time Magazine review, which listed as one of the 10 books of the year, period, that should have been repackaged, and it never has been. And that's, I think, the book could have sold more, a lot more.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us about some of the Saga books and what they're about and how you're planning to market them?
The first list, it's going to start in spring 2015, and we have one called City of Savages by Lee Kelly. It's her first book, and it's set at the end of World War III, and Manhattan is a demilitarized zone, and these two teenage girls and their mom are navigating the various political and awful situations that they're in here with lack of food and lack of housing, and also what's really going on in the rest of the world. And it's a juxtaposition of the mother's diary, which one of the daughters finds from 15 years earlier when the war was happening, and their present adventures, and it's really riveting. And so you get this adult voice and the teen voice at the same time, and it gives you a full picture of what's going on. It reads like a thriller. And then we got Genevieve Valentine's book Persona, which is it's just like this acerbic thriller that's, I don't know, it's Le Carré meets something that came out of Ballard, It takes the idea of reality TV gone crazy, which we're almost at, and just take Model UN idea, but you have these beautiful people who are representing different countries, and some of them date each other, and that helps their country's fortunes or whatnot, and these people are sort of representatives and sort of diplomats at the same time because they are involved, but they're not fully making the decisions. They're just sort of the faces, and at the same time, that's what the public sees. And yet at the same time, there's all these behind the scenes stuff going on, and it starts off with an assassination and attempt, and it's riveting. It's riveting, and it's speaking at so many different levels at the same time. And I think that's really great. And Genevieve's such a good writer.
Yeah, and I just want to remind listeners that we interviewed Genevieve Valentine back in episode 40 about her novel Mécanique, so you should go check that out.
Yeah. And, I love her writing. It's so idiosyncratic. And then I have this military sci-fi series called The Dark Side War, which takes place on the dark side of the moon. And it's on one level a straightforward military sci-fi, but it's playing around with your assumptions of what that would be at the same time. And so it's a little subversive. You can read it at one level or read it at another, and I love it because of that. And that's
that one by?
That one's Zachary Brown. It's a new voice as well. And then lastly, Ken Liu, his debut novel. It's an epic fantasy, and it's going to be called A Tempest of Gold. And
actually, you can read a story that takes place in that in that world in Lightspeed in the current issue, in the February issue. And it'll be up online for free by the time this podcast airs.
That's right. And it's this takes place in this secondary world that's Ken made up, and it actually started off with a map idea, not dissimilar from Le Guin and Earthsea, which I think is kind of cool. And he's incorporating on one level some of the classics of Chinese literature that he grew up with. Journey to the West and the Three Kingdoms, which, if you've seen Hero or Red Cliff, those movies, you'll be familiar with that storyline. Or even the Dynasty Warriors video game. But he's taken that and then exploded it. And so it's not just kind of this ersatz China, it's mix of Caucasians and whatnot, and all Western influences at the same time of the Eastern, and he's retelling these stories kind of in a Western bent. And it's epic in the true sense of the word, and I love it. Ken's such a good writer, and I think he's been nominated and won almost everything a couple of times, almost. And so it's very exciting to have his first book on our first list.
Yeah, when you started talking about Ken, I was about to say to John, you've published him, haven't you? But then it occurred to me like everyone's published him.
Yeah. Well, actually, Ken, I came across because of Diverse Energies. I had read something of his, but it didn't really click on me. And then Toby's like, oh, "What about this Ken Liu guy? I bet he's going to start exploding, dude. We should invite him." All right. And then we got to know each other, and so it's great. And even in the summer of 15, we're doing Stina Leck's first fantasy novel. It's going to be called Cold Iron. And that's somewhere between Moorcock's Coram novels meets Stephen Erickson's books. And then there's Ken Liu's short story collection, Paper Menagerie, and other stories. And then another thing that we're still working on the title of, so I won't say it, but it's kind of like Lev Grossman's Magicians meets the Chocolate War. And I think it's great. And that's also subversive in different ways. And I love playing around with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, so John, when Joe started this new imprint at Simon & Schuster, suddenly you had no agent, right? What was that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Joe was a little worried, like talking to all of his different clients that we would be mad at him or something. And like when he told me, I was just like, oh my God, that's awesome. That's amazing. And I mean, even from a selfish point of view, I was like, that's still amazing because I'm going to sell you so many anthologies over the years, you know? I mean, it's sad, obviously, not to work hand in hand with him anymore, but I mean, we'll be working together in some different context. And you know, we're still going to be friends and everything. So it's cool. I was really excited for him. And like, I mean, I knew it was like, he's perfect for that. Like, you know, he's saying it's his dream job. It's like, oh yeah. I mean, he was great as an agent, but like, this is like where he belongs, I feel. So I'm really happy for him. But so, you know, I had to go find a new agent and, I ended up with, Seth Fishman. And that's been going really well so far. I mean, you know, obviously he sold Best American for me. And, actually the timing of it actually was perfect for all of this to happen because, you know, like Joe said, we tried to sell the Best American thing, a couple of years ago. And then so when I signed with Seth, we were just talking about different projects and stuff. And it's like, I don't have a lot of projects that I tried to sell and didn't, but that was the one that was the big one that I was like, oh my God, I'm so like this, it's like my white whale sort of thing, you know, where it's like, it was the best proposal I'd ever written, I felt. And yet I hadn't been able to sell it. And so it was like and of course, obviously it was very important to me. And so I was just sort of mentioned that in passing. I didn't really think that, you know, we'd be able to sell it now, but, he's like, well, let me try it again. Let me give it another try, you know? And so, then it happened. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, I mean, before I signed with Seth, I, you know, did a bunch of research and talked to a couple different agents and whatnot. And, that was kind of stressful, that part. So I didn't love that part, you know, auditioning, everyone. It's kind of like dating, only, a lot less fun. So, yeah.
Well, it's almost more like marriage, isn't it? Because you're sort of going to be stuck with this person for.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I mean, having the actual agents like marriage. Yeah. But I mean, when you're auditioning them, when you're trying to figure out who to sign with, it's like dating, you know, and and that's what makes it scary, you know, because it's almost like, not only is it like dating, but then you're going to get married after 1 or 2 dates. You know, you're not going to really get to know them hardly at all. And so you have to, it's a big commitment. Yeah. Because, you know, when you have an agent and then you go your separate ways, that agent still controls the interests of the books that he sold for you. You know, so for instance, like Joe was with the Barry Goldblatt agency. And so Barry Goldblatt still controls the interests of a bunch of the books that I've sold. And so my previous agent, Jenny Rappaport, she controls the interests of some of the books, you know, that I'd sold. And so it's like, it's very important that whenever you leave an agent, you end up on good terms and, you know, it's very complicated. So yeah, it's a lot like a marriage and, you know, like including like custody battle over your children, in this case being your books.
I mean, so Joe, do you have any advice for people who are listening who maybe want to get an agent, things they should keep in mind when they're like quote unquote dating different agents?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about writing that perfect query letter. And most of the agents I know and how I treated it myself, really, there are all these rules and they're not there. Here are your basic rules. Write the agent's name correctly. Put their name down, spell it correctly. And really, it's about the writing. It's about the writing. Don't worry about the elevator pitch. Almost no one's good at that. Almost no one. You know, so don't worry about it. We all know that too. I mean, most of us can't write that stuff. So we scan it, we go like, okay, this is the kind of thing I like. All right, we're not really critiquing it. And then we go down to the writing. And then we read your sample. If we like that, then we pop back up and go through it critically, like, okay, and then we contact you. And then you want to read the whole thing or not. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety about that first step. And then beyond that, really, you know, there's look for an agent who does the kind of thing that you want them to represent, but not necessarily the same thing. You know, if you're writing a book that's in the same milieu or subgenre that author Y is writing, then why would they want you if they have author Y? You know, and so you have to think about that kind of thing.
Okay, but I mean, say we're talking to someone who doesn't know anything about publishing at all, and they have no idea what the first step is in finding an agent. How do they just find who the good agents are and avoid scam artists and stuff like that?
Well, you never pay for anything. If anyone ever reaches out to you on that, that's the wrong thing to do. And then from there, you know, if there's Publishers Marketplace, which has a listing of most but not all agents. There's a certain fee to pay for that, access to that. And then there are other websites. I forget right now if it's Query Tracker is one of them, and then there's another one on the children's side that does a listing of for free of who you could meet up with, who represents whom and whatnot. Different organizations like the Science Fiction Writers of America. If you become a member, if you qualify to become a member, they have a directory as well. So there are places, if you look up who represents whom, that you can find a resource. Let's start looking.
Yeah, I think SIFLA has some resources that are also available just to non-members as well. But I mean, I think what I would say is, I mean, one thing you can do to just find people is, you can look on the acknowledgments pages of books and whatnot, like books that you really liked or authors you really like. You can find out who their agent is usually by looking at the acknowledgments page, because every author thanks their agent. And
if they don't, that's probably a sign you don't want that agent.
Right? Yeah. You don't want that agent if they didn't bother to thank them. But so I mean, that's one way. But I mean, as far as like finding out the right one for you, like I think there's no one way to do it. I mean, there's lots of different types of agents. Like a lot of people, they're going to need like a really nurturing person who's going to really help them all. Like somebody like Joe, who's like, Joe is very nurturing as an agent. And like he was saying before, he did a lot of work editing on that end before it actually gets to the editor's desk at a publishing house. Whereas other agents are they're much more focused on the business side of things. Like their focus is more on the salesmanship part. And so like, depending on what type of person you are, that kind of thing might determine how well you're going to work with that person. Like, sometimes you need somebody who's going to be really firm with you and not take any of your shit, and make sure you stay on your deadlines and that kind of thing. So, there's all kinds of agents. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard to tell what kind of people they are until you actually start querying them. So, I mean, that's one of the unfortunate things. It's pretty tough to figure out, what everyone's like. I mean, if you don't know who any of them are.
All right, so John, then your other big project that I want to make sure that we mention is the Apocalypse Triptych that you're co-editing with Hugh Howey. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Apocalypse Triptych is a series of 3 anthologies, as the name implies. And so the first one's called The End Is Nigh. The second one is The End Is Now. And then the third one is The End Has Come. And so it's a triptych because the 3 books are going to focus on 3 different facets of the apocalypse. So The End Is Nigh is going to be what I call the pre-apocalypse. So it's about the events leading up to the world's destruction. The End Is Now is during the apocalypse. So it's chronicling the events of the world ending as it happens. And then The End Is Now, or as the end has come, is post-apocalyptic, which, the traditional idea is after the apocalypse has happened, whether it's right afterward or after we've already started rebuilding, that kind of thing. And so I initially pitched the idea to Hugh Howey after we met at Worldcon, and he really liked Wastelands, I really liked Wool, and I just threw out the idea of hey, how about we do an anthology together? Because I figured, well, I'd like to do another apocalyptic anthology, and that's right in his wheelhouse. So maybe that's something we could do together, and we could do it like as a self-published thing, and because I'm interested in experimenting and that kind of stuff. And so he was totally into it. And then the idea for the triptych came about because I was sort of casting around for ideas for the title for what became the Apocalypse Triptych. And initially it was just going to be the one book. But then, but I came across the phrase, The End Is Nigh. And I was like, oh, that's a really good phrase. It's like what doomsday prophets, always shout. And, they're wearing their sandwich boards that say the end is nigh and all that kind of stuff. And I really liked the phrase, but I was like, well, you can't call a post-apocalyptic anthology The End Is Nigh because the end has already happened, So, but then I kept thinking about it. And then, I didn't want to give up on the idea of doing a post-apocalyptic anthology because of all the 3 facets, that's actually where my heart lies in the apocalypse. But then it hit me to do, what if we did, the series of 3 different anthologies and focusing each on those different facets. And so I pitched it to Hugh and he was totally into it. And so that's how it was born.
I mean, doing this with Hugh Howey, if people don't know, is a gigantic superstar in self-publishing. Could you just talk about what it's like working with him?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny, like whenever you go to a co-edited anthology with somebody, especially when it's somebody who's like a best-selling author, you don't necessarily know like what sort of level of involvement are they going to want to have, like I co-edited a book with Daniel H. Wilson, and I wasn't sure when I started to do that either, but like he was a full partner, we were equal co-editors, like, he really got in there and did everything. And Hugh Howey was doing the same thing. And I mean, if anything, he's going above and beyond the Call of Duty. I mean, like, just doing all sorts of things. Like, I can't even imagine, how does he have time to do any of this stuff, And, so yeah, no, I mean, he's been great. And just the fact that, like you say, he is the superstar in self-publishing. Because of that, he has all of these connections and he has all of this access to stuff that regular self-published authors don't necessarily have. So like, for instance, he can talk to Amazon, he can just like be like, oh, I'm going to ask my contacts at Amazon what to do about this. And they'll sort it out, when they heard about it, the people at Amazon, who run like Kindle Direct Publishing or Create Space, which is two of the self-publishing tools, they were all on board. They want to help, So like, for instance, we have a pre-order page that's actually, up right now. Although actually by the time this airs, the book will actually be on sale. But, we were able to have a pre-order page, whereas most of the time, if you go through Kindle Direct Publishing, you can't actually have pre-orders. So that's been pretty great. And, of course, I'm very optimistic about what the books might do, largely because like each volume is going to have an original story by Hugh set in the universe of Wool, which is like his big best-selling series. And so, I think for that alone, I mean, even if we just get, Hugh's fans check it out, I mean, obviously it'd be hugely successful, but, yeah, so I mean, it's pretty exciting. And we got a stellar, like such a great table of contents too for the first one. Right. Like, I mean, we got the first, new story by Paolo Bacigalupi in like 5 years. So that's super exciting. And just like just really, really, really great lineup, Nancy Kress, Charlie Jane Anders, Will McIntosh, just all kinds of awesome people. And, if you go to the website, which I mentioned earlier, or did I mention it? It's johnjosephadams.com/apocalypse-triptych. But, you can see the whole table of contents. You can see the covers of all 3 volumes. You can find the pre-order links, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's been super exciting. And just like creatively, I kind of feel like this might be the best book I've ever done. Which obviously, you don't want to like choose your favorite child or anything. But I mean, it was so much fun, like editing this thing. It's like just one story after another was just like blowing me away. And I mean, and while I always really liked the stories I ended up publishing, I mean, it's like this one, it was just like, God, I can't believe like, well, this was my favorite story. It's like, oh no, now this one came in. Now this one's my favorite. It's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Joe, when John talks about, when he's so successful with this Kickstarter and with the self-publishing stuff, as someone who's working for a traditional publisher, just how do you feel about that? What impact do you think this sort of thing is going to have on agents and editors who work in the traditional publishing mode?
Oh, I think it all works together. I think different projects lend themselves to different means. And so I think the Kickstarter and the magazine issues is perfect because you're getting attention and funds in a way that you wouldn't be able to normally, right? And so that's perfect for this kind of thing. And sometimes short story collections work really well, or Hugh just hit right at the right moment at the zeitgeist of that kind of thing in literature being very popular. And so it was a good moment and it's a good book. And so it built on itself. But I don't believe in the adversarial relationship. I don't believe in the adversarial relationship in business at all. I didn't believe in it as a buyer. I don't believe in it now as an editor, nor did I as an agent. So I don't look at it that way. I look at it as like, well, that's interesting, and then you look at, okay, like, well, what is this going to do? What does this mean? And so if this segment is really focused on this kind of thing, and then you look at the bestsellers on the Kindle lists and whatnot, and you can see, all right, well, this kind of thing is trending, and I think that's interesting. And some authors then have print deals as well, and I think there's a way of working hand in hand.
All right, cool. So then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was just that you've actually been listening to this podcast since I think the first episode, since really close to the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many people actually, I mean, I know people have gone back and listened to a lot of the episodes, but I don't know I don't know that many people who started at the beginning and are still listening and, email us and give us their reactions to the conversations and stuff. So I just really want to thank you, Joe, for being such a loyal listener over all these years.
I love it. And, you guys have gotten the who's who, as Matt was saying in the last episode, the who's who of everyone. I mean, aside from a couple of notable exceptions, and you've both added so much to the conversation of fantasy and science fiction literature. I think it's great. And also, I think back to certain interviews and I like the Margaret Atwood one. I love that one. It's even recently she was still skirting around like, oh, it's not science fiction, it's crime fiction, whatever she's calling it. It's like, oh, let's get over yourself. But no, I thank you.
Yeah, well, maybe now with these Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and Simon & Schuster having their own science fiction imprint, it'll, Margaret Atwood will finally feel like science fiction is respectable enough to apply to her own work.
Well, but she is. I remember seeing her, not to go too far off tangent here, but if you will. I remember seeing her at the 92nd Street Y, interviewing William Gibson. And I went there for Bill Gibson because I was born in 1970, so Neuromancer was right when I was an older teen, when it was that moment. So I saw there for Bill Gibson, and there they were on stage, and I wasn't sure because I knew she was kind of like skirting around. It's not science fiction. I don't write that, sort of. And there she was talking about the sprawl and all the stuff, and she was definitely down with the lingo. And yeah, it was all Bill specific, but then she got into like the whole cyberpunk stuff, and she was a fan. She's a reader, and you can tell she had joy speaking about it. That totally changed my opinion of her. So I think she's stuck in semantics, and it's not really a worthwhile argument. And I know what she's saying, what she said with you, like, well, could happen and that can't. I think it's all part of the same conversation, the same literature.
All right, cool. So, John, any final thoughts? Any other projects you have coming up you want to mention? Anything like that?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of other things coming out this year as well. I have in April, I have Robot Uprisings, which I co-edited with Daniel H. Wilson. That's coming out from Vintage, and as the title implies, it's about robots uprising. Cool. So that one's pretty exciting, and it's going to get a good big marketing push from Vintage in bookstores and whatnot. So I'm excited to see where that's going to go, and that's going to potentially reach new audiences for me. And then in May, I have Dead Man's Hand, which is a weird Western anthology coming out from Titan. So that comes out in May. And then in July, I'm going to be publishing the anthology I kickstarted last year, Help Fund My Robot Army and other improbable crowdfunding projects. So that's going to come out in July. And that's the one where it's, all the stories are told in the form of a Kickstarter pitch, a fictional Kickstarter pitch. So those are all coming out this year. And then of course, as I mentioned, the Apocalypse Triptych, Volume 1 comes out March 1st. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then otherwise I'll just be working on Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy all year. And, the first volume of that will come out in October 2015.
Are you in touch with Daniel at all? What's going on with the Robo-Apocalypse movie?
Yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot of progress on that, I guess. I know I just did talk to Daniel the other day because we're working on another anthology that we have an offer on. And so we're waiting to hear back from, negotiations of that. So hopefully we'll be able to announce that soon. And I know he's been working on some other stuff as well that I can't actually talk about. It's all secret stuff, but it's actually very cool. And I'll tell you about it later, Dave, if you want.
Yeah, well, I think those two anthologies are a lot of fun, and obviously I was involved in them to some degree. But John, you do a lot of good work, and I'm really glad you're getting the recognition. And that Best American thing is going to be, I think, very important.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right, cool. So on that happy note, I think we should
group hug.
We should wrap. Yeah, I think we should wrap this up. So, Joe, thanks so much for stopping by.
Oh, thank you.
And John, it's so good to have you back. You should join us again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's like old times.
And that was our show. So big thanks to John Joseph Adams and Joe Monty for appearing as guest geeks. And of course, big thanks again to Michio Kaku for being our guest today. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Norwegian Warrior in the US, Repo Man X in Ireland, Droopy87 in Sweden, Kim 009 in Mexico, and 232-47353-FRUIHVU in Brazil. Norwegian Warrior writes, Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a witty, fun, and intelligent podcast. Before I heard this podcast, I thought I was alone in the world. Highly recommend it for anybody who loves reading and writing. Also a huge thank you to all of our crowdfunders, including Wes Weathersby, crowdfunder number 64, Jason Lind, crowdfunder number 19, George Turcotte, crowdfunder number 67, Ruby Gallagher, crowdfunder number 68, and Estelle Tidy, crowdfunder number 15. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.